Get your hand away from me. Margaret Whitmore stepped back like the black man in front of her carried a disease. He stood there, arm extended, waiting. Security. Her voice sliced through the lobby. Get this man out of here, now. 50 people watched. 3 phones came out. Someone hit record. The man lowered his hand slowly. He didn't argue, didn't beg, just looked at her with eyes that said he'd remember this moment forever. Security grabbed his arm, escorted him out like a criminal. Margaret smoothed her jacket and smiled at her guests. Sorry about that. You wouldn't believe the scammers who try to crash these events. She had no idea what she'd just done. The man in the worn jeans and gray hoodie, Isaiah Bennett. Net worth $4.2 billion. He flew 4 hours to save her dying company with an $800 million check. 23 hours from now, she'd be sitting in his lobby, begging for 5 minutes. He'd make her wait 7 hours before saying a single word. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. I said, get your hand away from me. Margaret's voice hit like a slap. The black man froze. His hand hung in the air between them. 4 seconds. 5. The longest 5 seconds of his life. Ms. Whitmore? His voice stayed calm, controlled. I'm Isaiah Bennett. We have a 2 o'clock meeting about... I don't have any meeting with you. Your assistant confirmed 3 weeks ago. I flew in from Atlanta this morning. Margaret looked at his clothes. Faded jeans, gray hoodie, white sneakers with scuff marks on the toes. Her lip curled. I don't know how you got this address, she said, but this is a private event for serious investors. I am a serious investor. Really? She crossed her arms. And what exactly do you invest in lottery tickets? Someone behind her gasped. A woman on a nearby couch looked up from her phone. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Ms. Whitmore, if you'd check with your assistant. I don't need to check with anyone. Margaret stepped closer. Close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something expensive. Something meant to intimidate. I know who belongs here, and you don't. Who belongs here? You heard me. Based on what exactly? Margaret's eyes traveled down his body, slow, deliberate, making sure everyone watching could see her judgment. Based on the fact that you showed up to a business meeting dressed like you're going to mow someone's lawn. The words landed like grenades. A bellhop near the entrance, young black, maybe 22, watched the whole thing. His hands curled into fists at his sides. His jaw locked so tight his teeth hurt, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Klaus Hoffmann, the German investor Margaret had been courting for months, shifted his weight. His face had gone pale. Margaret, he said quietly. Perhaps we should... One moment, Klaus. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Isaiah. This won't take long. Ms. Whitmore. Isaiah's voice dropped, quieter now, harder. I came here to discuss acquiring your hotel chain, the whole thing, $800 million. Margaret laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd already made up her mind, someone who couldn't be moved. 800 million, she repeated. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Call your CFO, Mark Reynolds. We've been in discussions for 3 months. He sent me your financials last week. Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Mark had mentioned something about a potential buyer, someone interested in the whole chain, not just a capital injection. She'd barely listened. She'd been too focused on Klaus, on the Europeans, on what she considered real money. But this man, in those clothes, numb. Impossible. I think, Margaret said slowly, that you need to leave before I have you arrested for trespassing. I'm not trespassing. I was invited. You were not invited. I have the emails. I don't care what you have. Margaret's voice rose, loud enough now that everyone in the lobby could hear. I care what I see, and what I see is someone who wandered in off the street thinking he could con his way into a meeting with people who actually matter. Isaiah went very still. People who actually matter, he repeated. That's right. And how do you determine who matters, Ms. Whitmore? The question hung in the air like smoke. Margaret felt the shift. The energy in the room changed. The concierge behind the desk had stopped typing. A couple near the champagne bar turned to watch. Even Klaus's associates had their phones out. Everyone was waiting. Don't try to make this into something it isn't, Margaret said. This has nothing to do with what? You know what I mean. I don't think I do. Isaiah tilted his head. Why don't you explain it to me? I'm saying that if you want to be taken seriously, you should dress like a serious person. This is a professional environment. We have standards. Standards based on what? On basic professionalism, on respect, on the color of my skin. Margaret's face went red. How dare you? I am not a racist. I didn't say you were. You implied it. I asked a question. Isaiah's voice stayed level. Calm. It made Margaret's anger look even uglier by comparison. You're the one who assumed I was a scammer. You're the one who refused to shake my hand. You're the one who's about to call security on a man whose only crime is wearing jeans to a meeting. Your only crime is lying your way into, I didn't lie about anything. You claim to be an investor. I am an investor. Then prove it. I shouldn't have to. The words hit Margaret like cold water. For a moment, just a moment, something shifted in her face. Doubt, uncertainty, the tiniest crack in her armor, then it was gone. Security. She raised her hand, snapped her fingers like she was summoning a dog. Can I get some help here? Two guards appeared immediately. One older black with a name tag that read Jerome. His face showed pain, real pain. Like he'd seen this before. Like he knew exactly what was happening and hated every second of it. The other guard was younger, white, eager. His hand moved to the radio on his belt. Ma'am. The young one spoke. Problem. Yes. Margaret pointed at Isaiah. This man is harassing my guests. He's not authorized to be here. Remove him, now. Jerome's eyes met Isaiah's. An entire conversation passed between them in that single look. Recognition, apology, shame. Sir, Jerome said softly, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. Isaiah nodded slowly. I understand. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't try to prove himself. He just turned and started walking toward the door. His steps were measured, controlled. Head high, back straight. The walk of a man who knew exactly who he was, even if no one else in the room did. The young guard grabbed his arm. Isaiah looked down at the hand on his bicep. You don't need to touch me, he said quietly. I'm leaving. The guard didn't let go. Jerome stepped between them. Let him walk, Danny. He's not resisting. Danny hesitated, looked at Margaret. She gave a sharp nod. The hand released. Isaiah walked the rest of the way alone. At the door he paused, turned back. Not to look at Margaret. She wasn't worth it. He looked at the bellhop, the young black kid with the fists clenched at his sides. Isaiah gave him a small nod, almost imperceptible. A message, I see you. This isn't your fault. Don't let them break you. Then he pushed through the door and disappeared into the Chicago afternoon. Margaret exhaled. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them against her skirt to hide it. She'd won. She'd handled it. Maintained control. She turned back to Klaus with her brightest smile. I am so sorry about that interruption. You would not believe the kind of people who try to crash these events. Klaus wasn't smiling. His face had gone cold. Ice cold. The face of a man who'd just made a decision. Margaret. His voice was quiet, dangerous. In 40 years of business, I have never witnessed something so revealing. What do you mean? I mean what you just did to that man. Klaus, he was obviously a con artist. You saw how he was dressed. I saw a man extend his hand in greeting. I saw you refuse to touch him. I saw you humiliate him in front of 50 people. Klaus picked up his briefcase. I saw enough. Margaret's stomach dropped. Klaus, wait. We haven't finished our discussion. We finished last week, Margaret. I told you no. We only came today out of courtesy. He buttoned his jacket. I'm grateful now. You showed me who you really are. Klaus. Goodbye, Margaret. He walked away. Friedrich and Hans followed without a word. Margaret stood alone in the center of the lobby. The marble floor stretched around her like a frozen lake. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, indifferent to her humiliation. Everyone was watching. Everyone had seen. A woman on the couch was still recording. Margaret's face burned. Her hands shook. Her chest felt tight like someone was standing on it. She forced herself to walk. One foot in front of the other. Toward the elevator. Away from the eyes. Away from the whispers already starting behind her back. The doors closed. She was alone. And for the first time in 62 years, Margaret Whitmore was afraid. Mrs. Whitmore. Sarah's voice came from the doorway, small, scared. Margaret didn't look up. She was staring at her computer screen, but the words blurred together. She couldn't focus, couldn't think. What? I need to show you something. Not now, Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, it's important. Something in Sarah's voice made Margaret look up. Her assistant stood in the doorway holding her tablet with both hands. Her face was white. Not pale. White. Like she'd seen a ghost. What is it? Sarah walked forward. Her hands were shaking. The tablet trembled as she set it on Margaret's desk. Forbes magazine. Digital edition. The headline read, Isaiah Bennett, the real estate billionaire America's never heard of. The photo showed a black man in a casual blue shirt smiling at the camera. Same face, same calm eyes, same man Margaret had thrown out of her hotel 20 minutes ago. Margaret's blood turned to ice. Her eyes moved down the page. The words jumped out like punches. Net worth $4.2 billion. Bennett Capital Partners, $3.8 billion in assets under management. Portfolio 52 investments. 47 successful exits. 94% success rate. Board positions. Marriott International. Hilton Worldwide. Four Seasons Hotels. Hyatt. And 7 others. Margaret stopped breathing. Sarah. Her voice came out wrong. Strangled. Broken. Tell me this is a different person. Sarah scrolled down with a trembling finger. More photos. Isaiah at the Forbes 400 summit, standing between Warren Buffett and Mark Cuban. Isaiah at the White House, shaking hands with the president. Isaiah receiving the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. Isaiah on the cover of Black Enterprise magazine. In every photo he wore casual clothes, polos, button-downs, jeans, never a suit. There was a quote highlighted in the article. I dress casually to every first meeting. It's a test. I want to see if people respect me for my ideas or judge me by my appearance. You'd be amazed how many successful people fail this simple test. Margaret's hands went numb. The feeling spread up her arms, into her chest. The meeting, Sarah whispered. It was confirmed 3 weeks ago. I sent you the brief. I sent you his bio. I sent you everything. I didn't read it. I know. I never read them. I know. Silence. Margaret tried to swallow. Her throat was too dry. What did he want? To acquire Sterling Hotels. The whole chain. All 12 properties. Sarah's voice cracked. He was offering $800 million. $800 million. The number hit Margaret like a train. $800 million. Enough to pay off all their debt. Enough to save every employee. Enough to secure the company for another generation. Gone. Oh God. Margaret stood up. Her chair flew backward and slammed into the window. Oh God. Oh God. Her hands were shaking, actually shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk to make them stop, but they wouldn't. Get me his number. Mrs. Whitmore. Get me his number, Sarah, now. Sarah pulled up the contact information. Margaret grabbed her phone and dialed with trembling fingers. Ring, ring, ring. You've reached Isaiah Bennett. Leave a message. Mr. Bennett, this is Margaret Whitmore. Her voice broke. She fought to control it. I believe there was a terrible misunderstanding this morning. Please call me back. I need to explain. She hung up. Called again. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. He's not answering. Margaret's voice rose toward panic. Why isn't he answering? Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face went somehow even whiter. Mrs. Whitmore, you need to see this. Twitter. Klaus Hoffman's verified account. Witnessed a shocking display of unprofessionalism in Chicago today. A CEO refused to shake a man's hand because of how he was dressed. She had security remove him, like a criminal. How you treat people when you think they have no power reveals everything about your character. At Business Ethics, #respect. Posted 18 minutes ago. Already 400 retweets, and climbing. The replies were flooding in. Name and shame. Let me guess the man was black. This is why corporate America is broken. Someone find out who this CEO is. Margaret's phone buzzed. Text from Richard Chen, chairman of the Sterling Hotels Board. Emergency meeting tomorrow 8 a.m. We need to talk about what happened at the Four Seasons. This is serious, Margaret. Her phone buzzed again. Her PR firm. We're getting calls from reporters. What happened today? Call me immediately. Again, a board member. Margaret, Twitter is blowing up. Is this about you? Again, her lawyer. Don't talk to anyone. Don't post anything. Call me. The phone kept buzzing. Message after message after message. Margaret dropped it on the desk like it was burning her hand. She looked at Sarah, her assistant. The young woman who'd tried to warn her, who'd sent her Isaiah's bio, who'd done everything right. How bad is this? Sarah's eyes were wet. Bad, Mrs. Whitmore. Really bad. Can we fix it? Sarah didn't answer. That was answer enough. Bad. Margaret didn't go home that night. She couldn't face it. The empty house, the silence, the thoughts that would come in the dark. Instead, she booked a seat on the 11:47 p.m. red-eye to Atlanta. She didn't pack, didn't change, just grabbed her purse and drove to O'Hare with shaking hands and a racing heart. Isaiah's office was in Atlanta. Bennett Capital Partners. If she could just get there. Just talk to him. Just explain. The plane was half empty. Margaret sat in first class, staring out the window at nothing. She'd called Isaiah 14 more times before boarding. The first 6 went to voicemail. After that, straight to a message. The number you are trying to reach is not accepting calls. He'd blocked her. She'd sent 9 emails, each one more desperate than the last. Mr. Bennett, please allow me to explain. Isaiah, I know I don't deserve your time, but please. I'm begging you. Please respond. Nothing. She'd found his LinkedIn, sent a connection request with a personal message. Mr. Bennett, I made a terrible mistake. I misjudged you completely. Please give me a chance to apologize in person. Please. Nothing. The flight attendant came by, asked if she wanted anything. Margaret shook her head. She couldn't eat, couldn't drink, could barely breathe. 4 hours in the air. 4 hours of staring at the seat in front of her. 4 hours of replaying that moment in the lobby. His hand extended, her step backward. Get your hand away from me. She'd said that, those exact words, to a man worth $4 billion, to a man who'd flown 4 hours to save her company, to a man who'd done nothing wrong except show up in clothes she didn't approve of. No. That wasn't the whole truth. He'd shown up in clothes she didn't approve of while being black. The thought made her stomach turn. She wasn't racist. She'd voted for Obama. Twice. She donated to the NAACP every year. She had black employees. Black friends. Didn't she? She tried to think of their names. She couldn't. The plane hit turbulence. Margaret gripped the armrest. Her knuckles went white. She thought about what Isaiah had asked her in the lobby. "And how do you determine who matters, Ms. Whitmore?" She hadn't answered. Not really. She'd deflected. Made it about clothes, about professionalism, about standards. But they both knew the truth. She'd looked at a black man in casual clothes and decided in less than 3 seconds that he didn't belong. Not based on his words. Not based on his credentials. Not based on anything he'd done. Just his appearance. Just his skin. The plane began its descent. The lights of Atlanta sparkled below like a carpet of stars. Margaret closed her eyes. She had no idea what she was going to say to Isaiah Bennett. She only knew she had to try. Bennett Capital Partners occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Buckhead. Margaret arrived at 6:52 a.m. The sun was barely up. The lobby was empty, except for a security guard reading a newspaper and a cleaning crew finishing their morning rounds. She found a chair near the elevators and sat down. Her Armani suit was wrinkled from the flight. There was a coffee stain on her sleeve she hadn't noticed until now. Her hair had come loose from its usual tight pull. She didn't care. At 7:30, employees started arriving. Young professionals in business casual, a few executives in suits. They glanced at her curiously, but said nothing. At 8:00, the reception desk opened. A young woman took her position. Name tag Lisa. Professional smile, sharp eyes. Margaret approached immediately. "Good morning. I need to see Isaiah Bennett." Lisa's fingers paused over her keyboard. Her smile cooled by about 10 degrees. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent. Please. Tell him Margaret Whitmore is here." Something flickered in Lisa's eyes. Recognition. Understanding. She'd seen the tweets. "One moment." Lisa picked up the phone, spoke quietly, listened. Her face revealed nothing. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Bennett is in meetings all day. He's not available. I'll wait." "Ma'am, he could be in meetings until 7 or 8 tonight." "I'll wait." Lisa studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "There are chairs by the window." Margaret walked to the waiting area and sat down. At 9:02, she was still there. At 10:00, Lisa brought her coffee without being asked. Margaret accepted it with trembling hands. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. At 11:00, a young man approached. Neat suit, kind eyes. Name tag Jason, executive assistant. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Bennett asked me to tell you he appreciates you coming, but he really isn't available today." "I'll wait." "Ma'am, perhaps you could leave your contact information. We could schedule something for—" "I'm not leaving." Jason blinked. "Excuse me." "I said I'm not leaving." Margaret's voice cracked. She didn't try to hide it. "I flew here overnight. I've been sitting in this chair for 4 hours. I will sit here for 4 more, or 8 more, or however long it takes." "Mrs. Whitmore, I destroyed a man's dignity yesterday." Margaret looked up at him. Her eyes were red, wet. "I humiliated him in front of 50 people because of how he was dressed, because of what he looked like. I didn't shake his hand. I called him a scammer. I had security throw him out." Jason said nothing. "I have 4,500 employees who are going to lose their jobs because of what I did. 4,500 families, because I couldn't see past my own prejudice." Margaret's voice broke. "So no, I'm not leaving. I'm not scheduling something for next month. I'm going to sit here until Mr. Bennett gives me 5 minutes to apologize." Silence. Jason looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." He walked away. 1 hour passed, then 2. At 2:15 p.m., Jason returned. Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret stood up so fast she got dizzy. She grabbed the arm of the chair to steady herself. Mr. Bennett can give you 15 minutes. Conference room B, 4th floor. Thank you. The words came out as a whisper. Thank you. The elevator ride took forever. Margaret watched the numbers climb. 2, 3, 4. The doors opened. A young woman led her down a hallway. Simple, clean, no fancy art, no marble floors, nothing to prove. Conference room B was small. 1 table, 6 chairs. A window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Isaiah Bennett sat at the head of the table, navy button-down, sleeves rolled up, no tie, no jacket. Same casual clothes he'd worn yesterday. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at her with those calm, cold eyes and said, "Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret sat. Her legs barely held her. "Your 15 minutes starts now." Margaret opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. She'd rehearsed this moment on the plane. Practiced what she would say. Planned every word. But now, sitting across from Isaiah Bennett with those calm eyes watching her, every rehearsed line vanished. "I'm waiting, Mrs. Whitmore." His voice was quiet, not angry, not cold, just waiting. Like he'd seen this before. Like he knew exactly how this conversation would go. "I'm sorry." The words came out broken. "I'm so sorry for what I did yesterday." Isaiah didn't respond. He just looked at her. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't read your bio. I didn't look at the meeting brief. I just saw—" She stopped. "You just saw what—" Isaiah leaned forward slightly. "Finish that sentence, Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret's hands trembled in her lap. I saw someone who didn't look like the investors I usually meet. Didn't look like them. How? The clothes. The casual. The clothes." Isaiah repeated the word slowly, like he was tasting it. "So, if a white man had walked in wearing jeans and a hoodie, you would have called security on him too." Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. "Answer the question." I don't know." "Yes, you do." Silence. Margaret felt tears building behind her eyes. She blinked them back. She would not cry. She had no right to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. "No," she whispered. "I probably wouldn't have." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest. That's more than most people manage. I'm not racist. I didn't say you were. But you're thinking it. I'm thinking that you looked at a black man in casual clothes and decided in 3 seconds that he didn't belong in your world." Isaiah's voice stayed level, controlled. "I'm thinking you refused to shake my hand like I was contaminated. I'm thinking you called me a scammer, a con artist, someone who wandered in off the street." Each word landed like a blow. "I'm thinking you had me escorted out by security guards while 50 people watched, while people recorded on their phones." Isaiah paused. "I'm thinking you looked at me and saw everything except a human being." Margaret's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. "I made a mistake." "This wasn't a mistake." Isaiah shook his head. "A mistake is sending an email to the wrong person. A mistake is double booking a meeting. What you did was reveal who you are." "That's not who I am." "Then who are you? Mrs. Whitmore?" Margaret didn't have an answer. Isaiah leaned back in his chair. For a long moment he just studied her, like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like he was deciding something important. "Let me tell you a story," he said finally. "When I was 22 years old, I had an idea, a real estate algorithm that could predict market shifts 18 months ahead. I knew it would work. I had the data. I had the proof." Margaret stayed silent, listening. "I pitched that idea to 37 investors. 37 meetings. You know how many took me seriously? How many? 0. Isaiah held up his hand. fingers forming a circle. 0, Mrs. Whitmore. Every single one looked at me the way you looked at me yesterday. Some were polite about it, some weren't. But they all saw the same thing. A young black kid from Chicago who didn't belong in their world. What did you do? I built it anyway. Took me 4 years working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating ramen for dinner because I couldn't afford anything else. Isaiah's voice stayed calm, but something deeper ran beneath it. And when that algorithm made its first billion-dollar prediction, guess who came calling those same 37 investors? Suddenly they wanted to be my best friend. Suddenly they wanted to shake my hand. Margaret felt sick. You know what I told them? What? I told them the same thing I'm going to tell you. Isaiah paused. No. The word hit Margaret like a physical blow. Mr. Bennett, please. I have 4,500 employees. I know how many employees you have. They'll lose their jobs, their families. I know. Then how can you just walk away? Isaiah's eyes hardened. How could you just throw me out? Margaret had no answer. Do you know why I dress like this? Isaiah gestured at his casual clothes. It's not because I can't afford a suit. I own 47 suits. Custom tailored, Italian wool. I could buy your entire wardrobe 10 times over. Then why? Because I got tired of pretending. Isaiah's voice dropped. I got tired of putting on a costume so people like you would take me seriously. I got tired of changing who I am just to fit into spaces that should have welcomed me from the beginning. He leaned forward. So now I dress exactly how I want. Jeans, hoodies, sneakers, and I let people show me who they really are. He paused. You showed me Mrs. Whitmore, loud and clear. Margaret's tears finally broke free. She wiped them away with the back of her hand. I can't undo what I did. No, you can't. But I can try to make it right. Isaiah studied her. 10 seconds. 20. The silence stretched until Margaret thought she would scream. Maybe, he said finally. Maybe you can. Margaret's heart stopped. What? I said maybe. Isaiah held up a hand. Don't get excited. This isn't forgiveness. This isn't me saying everything's okay. This is me giving you a chance to prove you're capable of change. I'll do anything. Don't say that until you hear my conditions. Margaret swallowed hard. What conditions? Isaiah reached into his portfolio and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table. Margaret looked down at it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely read the words. First condition. Isaiah's voice was ice. Public apology, press conference. You admit exactly what you did. No spin, no PR language. You say the words racial profiling, and you mean them. Margaret's stomach dropped. A press conference, national media, full coverage. You stand up in front of cameras and you tell the truth. That will destroy my reputation. Your reputation should be destroyed. Isaiah didn't blink. Keep reading. Margaret looked back at the paper. Her vision blurred. She forced herself to focus. Second condition. Independent cultural audit of Sterling hotels. Every property, every department, every hiring decision for the past 10 years. That will take months. It will take however long it takes, and whatever they find, you make public. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. She knew what they would find. She'd always known. She'd just never let herself look. Third condition, Isaiah continued. You step down as CEO. Margaret's head snapped up. What? You step down as CEO within 30 days. You can stay on the board in a non-executive capacity, but you don't run the company anymore. That company is my family's legacy. 3 generations. And in 1 generation you proved you're not fit to lead it. The words cut deep, deeper than Margaret expected. She felt something break inside her, something she'd been holding together for 62 years. Fourth condition: board diversity. 50% people of color within 12 months. Real positions. Real power. Not tokens. Margaret nodded slowly. She couldn't speak. Fifth condition: $3 million. Personal donation. From your own accounts, not the company's. Goes to minority hospitality scholarships. Another nod. Sixth condition. Isaiah paused. This is the one that matters most. Margaret looked up. 12 months of intensive bias training. Not some corporate seminar where you sit in a room for 2 hours and check a box. Real work. With a real coach. Documented. Public progress reports every quarter. Public. Everything public. No hiding. No pretending. You either change for real or everyone watches you fail. Margaret stared at the paper. 6 conditions. 6 impossible demands. Her reputation. Her position. Her money. Her pride. Everything she'd spent 62 years building. Gone. If I agree to all this, she said slowly, you'll invest. If you agree to all this and if you actually follow through, I'll consider investing. Isaiah's voice was cold. You don't get guarantees, Mrs. Whitmore. You get a chance. That's more than most people in my position would give you. And if I say no, then I walk out of this room and you never hear from me again. Your company files for bankruptcy in 6 weeks. 4,500 people lose their jobs, and every single one of them will know it's because their CEO was too proud to admit she was wrong. Margaret closed her eyes. She thought about her grandfather, building the first Sterling Hotel in 1952, working 18-hour days, sweating through Chicago summers with no air conditioning. She thought about her father, expanding the chain, teaching her the business, telling her she'd run it someday. She thought about herself, 22 years old, fresh out of business school. So certain she knew everything, so certain she belonged. She'd spent her whole life believing she'd earned her place, that she was special, that she deserved the power she held. But she hadn't earned anything. Not really. She'd been born into it. Born white, born wealthy, born into a world that opened doors for her before she even knocked. And she'd spent 62 years pretending those doors opened because she was exceptional. They didn't. They opened because she looked the part. Isaiah had the same intelligence, the same drive, the same ambition. But he'd had to fight for every inch, had to prove himself 1,000 times over, had to build his own doors because no one would open theirs. And when he finally stood at the top, when he finally had more money and power than anyone in that hotel lobby, Margaret had still looked at him and seen nothing. Because he didn't look the part. Because his skin was the wrong color. Because her 62 years of privilege had made her blind. I'll do it. The words came out before Margaret could stop them. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. All of it. All of it. The press conference, the audit, stepping down, the diversity requirements, the donation, the training. Margaret's voice shook, but didn't break. All of it. You understand what you're agreeing to. I understand. I'm about to lose everything I thought mattered. Margaret met his eyes, and I understand that maybe it never should have mattered in the first place. Isaiah studied her for a long moment. Then he stood up. My lawyers will draft the formal agreement. You have 48 hours to schedule the press conference. If you miss that deadline, the deal is off. He walked toward the door. And Mrs. Whitmore, yes. This isn't redemption. This is a beginning. What you do next determines whether you deserve a second chance or not. He opened the door. I'll be watching. Then he was gone. Margaret sat alone in the conference room. The paper with Isaiah's conditions lay on the table in front of her. 6 bullet points, 6 demands, 6 steps toward becoming someone different, or 6 steps toward complete destruction. Maybe both. Her phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Mrs. Whitmore, the board is asking where you are. Klaus Hoffman's tweet has 47,000 retweets now. There's a journalist from the Tribune outside the Chicago office. Margaret typed back with trembling fingers. Book me on the next flight back. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. Full media. And Sarah. Yes. Call a board meeting for tonight. Emergency session. I have something to tell them. She stood up from the table. Her legs felt weak. Her whole body felt weak. But somewhere beneath the fear and shame and exhaustion, something else stirred. Something that felt almost like relief. The pretending was finally over. Now came the hard part. Margaret landed in Chicago at 7:15 p.m. She went straight to the Sterling Hotel's headquarters without stopping home to change. The board was already assembled in the conference room. 8 faces around a mahogany table, some sympathetic, some furious, some carefully blank. Richard Chen sat at the head of the table, chairman for 15 years. He'd known Margaret since she was a junior executive learning the business from her father. He didn't look friendly tonight. Margaret. His voice was clipped. Thank you for joining us. We've been trying to reach you for 18 hours. I know, I'm sorry. Margaret took her seat at the opposite end of the table. I was in Atlanta. Atlanta? Richard's eyebrows rose. Doing what? Meeting with Isaiah Bennett. The room went silent. Isaiah Bennett. Richard repeated the name slowly. The man you had thrown out of the Four Seasons yesterday, that Isaiah Bennett. Yes. The billionaire investor who was our last chance at survival. The man whose Twitter mentions are currently calling for your resignation. That Isaiah Bennett. Yes. And how did that meeting go? Margaret took a breath. This was it. No going back. He's agreed to invest $800 million. But there are conditions. The tension in the room shifted. Confusion replaced anger. Richard leaned forward. What conditions? Margaret pulled out the paper Isaiah had given her. Her hands were steady now. The decision was made. All that remained was the execution. Public press conference. Tomorrow. I admit to racial profiling. Full accountability. Someone gasped. Margaret didn't look to see who. Independent cultural audit of the entire company. Every property. Every department. Richard's face tightened. I stepped down as CEO within 30 days. Now the room erupted. Margaret, that's insane. You can't just... The shareholders will never... Quiet. Richard's voice cut through the noise. The room fell silent. Let her finish. Margaret continued. Board diversity requirements. 50% people of color within 12 months. $3 million personal donation to minority hospitality scholarships. And 12 months of documented bias training. Silence. That's everything. That's everything. Richard sat back in his chair. His expression was unreadable. Let me make sure I understand. You're agreeing to publicly destroy your own reputation. You're agreeing to step down from the company your family built. You're agreeing to expose any discrimination in our organization. And you're agreeing to undergo a year of public accountability. Yes. For $800 million. For $800 million. And for the 4,500 employees who would lose their jobs if I don't. Richard looked around the table. Does anyone have questions for Margaret? Helen Park spoke first. Youngest board member. 41. Korean American. She'd always been one of Margaret's biggest supporters. Margaret, what happened in that lobby? Really? Margaret closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Helen was still waiting. I saw a black man in casual clothes, and I decided immediately without thinking that he didn't belong. I refused to shake his hand. I humiliated him. I had him thrown out. Margaret's voice stayed level, but something trembled beneath it. I did that because somewhere deep inside me, I believed that a black man couldn't possibly be the investor I was waiting for. That belief was unconscious. That belief was wrong. And that belief is going to cost me everything I've spent my life building." Helen nodded slowly. "And the bias training. Is that real, or is it just PR?" "It's real." Margaret met her eyes. "I've spent 62 years believing I wasn't prejudiced. I was wrong. I need help. Real help. And I'm willing to get it in public because hiding it would just be more of the same." Michael Torres spoke next, CFO, Hispanic. He'd been with the company for 20 years. Margaret had passed him over for promotion twice. "The cultural audit." His voice was carefully controlled. "What do you think they'll find?" Margaret felt the weight of that question. "Patterns," she said quietly. "Patterns I didn't want to see. Patterns I chose not to see. I suspect they'll find that people of color in this company have been promoted less frequently, paid less fairly, and valued less consistently than their white counterparts." "You suspect—" "I know." Margaret's voice cracked. "I've known for a long time. I just told myself it was coincidence, or market factors, or anything except the truth." Michael nodded once. His face revealed nothing, but something in his eyes shifted. "The CEO position." Richard's voice drew everyone's attention back. "If you step down, who takes over? That's not my decision anymore. That's the board's. We'll need time to discuss." "You have 30 days." Margaret stood up. "I'd recommend Michael, or Helen. Both are more qualified than I realized." She paused. "I spent a lot of years not realizing things." She walked toward the door. "Margaret." Richard's voice stopped her. She turned. "For what it's worth." This took courage. Margaret shook her head slowly. "No." This took desperation. Courage would have been seeing my bias before it hurt someone. Courage would have been listening to the employees I ignored for 20 years. What I'm doing now isn't courage, it's consequence. She opened the door. "The press conference is tomorrow at 2 p.m. I hope you'll all be there." Then she was gone. The drive home took 45 minutes. Margaret didn't turn on the radio, didn't check her phone, just drove through Chicago streets she'd driven 1,000 times. Everything looked the same, but she was different now. She pulled into the driveway of her Pacific Heights home. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a kitchen she barely used, a living room she barely sat in. Her husband had left 7 years ago. Her daughter hadn't called in 3 months. The house was empty. Margaret walked inside, turned on a single light, sat down on the couch in yesterday's wrinkled suit, and finally, alone in the darkness, she let herself fall apart. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere she hadn't accessed in decades. Her whole body shook with them. Tears poured down her face until her skin burned. She cried for Isaiah, for the dignity she'd stolen from him. She cried for her employees, for the years of bias they'd endured under her leadership. She cried for herself, for the woman she'd become without realizing it, for the blindness she'd mistaken for excellence, and she cried for the truth she'd been running from her entire life. She wasn't exceptional. She wasn't special. She was just someone who'd been given every advantage and convinced herself she'd earned it. The crying lasted an hour, maybe longer. Margaret lost track of time. When it finally stopped, she felt hollow, empty, like someone had scraped out everything inside her and left nothing but exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion, something else remained. Resolution. She'd spent 62 years building a life on a foundation of lies. Lies, she told herself. Lies she told others. Lies so comfortable she'd forgotten they were lies at all. Tomorrow she would start tearing that foundation down. She didn't know what would be left when she finished. But whatever it was, at least it would be true. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She sat in her empty house in the dark, and she thought about every person of color she'd ever worked with, every employee she'd dismissed, every resume she'd rejected, every promotion she'd denied. She thought about Maria, her housekeeper, for 15 years. Margaret didn't even know Maria's last name. She thought about Jerome, the security guard who'd escorted Isaiah out of the lobby. The pain in his eyes. The way he'd apologized for doing his job. She thought about the bellhop, the young black kid who'd watched the whole thing with his fists clenched. What was his name? Did Margaret even look at his name tag? She couldn't remember. 62 years, and she couldn't remember. At 5 a.m., she got up and made coffee. At 6 a.m., she showered and changed into a simple black dress. No jewelry except her mother's pearl necklace. No armor. At 1:30 p.m., she arrived at the press conference. The room was packed. Cameras everywhere. Journalists crammed into every corner. Someone had leaked the story overnight. Everyone knew something big was coming. Margaret walked to the podium. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands gripped the wood so hard her knuckles went white. 40 cameras pointed at her. 40 lenses waiting to capture her destruction. She looked out at the crowd, and she began to speak. 2 days ago, I committed an act of racial profiling. The room went silent. A black man came to my hotel for a scheduled meeting. He was dressed casually, and I took one look at him and decided he didn't belong. Someone's camera flash went off, then another. I refused to shake his hand. I called him a scammer. I had security remove him from the building while 50 people watched. Margaret's voice cracked. She forced herself to continue. That man was Isaiah Bennett, billionaire investor, Forbes 400, one of the most successful business people in America. He came to save my company, and I threw him out like garbage. The words hung in the air. But here's the truth that's even harder to admit. Margaret gripped the podium tighter. If Isaiah Bennett had been nobody, if he'd been exactly what I assumed, just a random man who wandered into the wrong meeting, my behavior still would have been wrong. The crime wasn't misjudging a billionaire. The crime was treating another human being as less than human. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. I am 62 years old. I have spent my entire life believing I was a good person, believing I wasn't prejudiced, believing I saw people for who they were, not what they looked like. She paused. I was wrong. The room was completely silent. I am announcing today that I will step down as CEO of Sterling Hotels within 30 days. I am committing to an independent cultural audit of our entire organization. I am personally donating $3 million to minority hospitality scholarships, and I am beginning 12 months of intensive bias training, which will be documented publicly. Margaret looked directly into the nearest camera. To Isaiah Bennett, I am deeply sorry. Not because you were powerful, because you were human, and I failed to see that. She stepped back from the podium. I'll take your questions now. The first question came like a bullet. Mrs. Whitmore, do you consider yourself a racist? Margaret gripped the podium. The room held its breath. I considered myself not racist for 62 years, she said slowly. I was wrong about that, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question anymore. But do you think what you did was racist? I think what I did was the result of bias I didn't know I had. Whether that makes me racist or not. Margaret paused. I think that's for other people to decide. What I know is that I caused harm, real harm, and the label matters less than fixing it. Another hand shot up. A young black woman from CNN. Mrs. Whitmore, you said you're stepping down as CEO. Are you being forced out, or is this your choice? It's both. Margaret's voice stayed steady. Mr. Bennett required it as a condition of his investment. And honestly, he's right. I'm not fit to lead this company anymore. Maybe I never was. Do you think a public apology is enough? No. Margaret shook her head. Words are never enough. That's why I'm committing to action. The audit, the diversity requirements, the training. Those aren't words. Those are commitments that can be measured. If I fail to meet them, everyone will know. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal stood up. Gray hair, expensive suit. The kind of man Margaret would have considered a peer 2 days ago. Mrs. Whitmore, some would say you're only doing this because you got caught. Because Isaiah Bennett happened to be powerful. What would you say to that? Margaret felt the truth of the question cut through her. They're right. The room stirred. If Isaiah Bennett had been a regular person, someone without money, without power, without a Forbes profile, I never would have faced consequences. I would have gone home that night and forgotten about him. That's the truth. That's how broken the system is. Margaret's voice hardened. And that's exactly why this matters. Because there are thousands of Isaiah Bennetts out there who don't have $4 billion, who get treated the way I treated him every single day. And nobody ever apologizes. Nobody ever changes. She looked directly into the camera. I can't fix what I did, but maybe I can be an example. Maybe watching me face consequences will make someone else think twice before they do the same thing. The questions continued for 45 minutes. Some were hostile. Some were sympathetic. Some were clearly designed to make her look worse. Margaret answered every single one. By the time it was over, her voice was hoarse and her legs were shaking. But she'd done it. She'd told the truth. Now came the hard part. The board met that evening. Margaret wasn't invited. She sat in her office, her former office really, though she hadn't cleaned it out yet, and waited. Her phone sat face down on the desk. She couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The coverage was everywhere. Every network, every website, every social media platform. Some called her brave. Most called her too little too late. A few called her calculating, doing whatever it took to save her company. They weren't entirely wrong. At 9:47 p.m., her office door opened. Richard Chen walked in. His face was unreadable. "It's done," he said. "The board voted unanimously to accept your resignation, effective immediately." Margaret nodded. She'd expected this. "Michael Torres is the new CEO. Helen Park is COO. We're announcing tomorrow morning." "Good choices." "They were your recommendations." "They were the right recommendations. I should have made them years ago." Richard sat down across from her. For a moment he didn't speak. Just looked at her with something that might have been pity, or respect, or both. "Margaret, I've known you for 30 years. I watched you build this company into something your father would have been proud of, and I watched you destroy it in 3 minutes." He paused. "But what you did today, the press conference that took something I didn't know you had. What's that? Honesty." Margaret almost laughed. "I've been lying to myself for 62 years, Richard. Honesty isn't my strong suit." "Maybe not, but you told the truth today when you didn't have to. You could have blamed it on stress, on miscommunication, on anything except what it actually was." Richard leaned forward. "You didn't. Why?" Margaret thought about it, really thought. "Because Isaiah Bennett looked at me across that conference table and asked me a question I couldn't answer." Her voice dropped. "He asked me who I was, and I realized I didn't know. I'd spent my whole life thinking I knew exactly who I was, successful, fair, good. But that woman in the lobby, the one who wouldn't shake his hand, the one who called security on him like he was trash, that was me too. That was the real me. The me I'd been hiding from." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do now?" "What I promised. The training, the work, all of it." "And after?" "I don't know." Margaret looked around the office. The awards on the walls, the photos with governors and senators, the framed magazine covers. "I spent 62 years building this identity. Now I have to figure out who I am without it." Richard stood up, walked to the door, paused. "For what it's worth, Margaret, I hope you figure it out." Then he was gone. Margaret sat alone in the office that was no longer hers. Tomorrow someone else would sit behind this desk. Someone else would make the decisions. Someone else would carry the legacy her grandfather had built, and she would start over, at 62 years old, with nothing but her shame and a chance she didn't deserve. The first week was the hardest. Margaret moved out of her office on Tuesday, packed her personal items into 3 boxes, walked past employees who wouldn't meet her eyes. She understood. She didn't blame them. The media coverage continued relentlessly. Every network ran the story. Every talk show discussed it. Every social media platform had an opinion. Some people defended her, said she was being unfairly punished, said one mistake shouldn't define a lifetime. Most didn't. Margaret read every article, watched every segment, forced herself to see how the world saw her now. Racist CEO, privileged white woman, everything wrong with corporate America. The labels hurt, but not as much as knowing they were at least partially true. Her daughter called on Wednesday, first time in 3 months. "Mom, what the hell is going on? I'm seeing your face everywhere." "Did you watch the press conference?" "Parts of it." "Mom, are you okay?" Margaret almost laughed. "No, sweetheart, I'm not okay, but I'm trying to be better." "What happened? I mean, really happened?" Margaret told her. All of it. The meeting, the humiliation, the flight to Atlanta, Isaiah's conditions, everything. Her daughter was quiet for a long time. "Mom, I didn't know you were like that." The words cut deep. "Neither did I. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to see it." "What are you going to do?" "The work. The real work. Not just checking boxes, but actually changing." "Do you think you can—" Margaret closed her eyes. "I don't know, but I have to try." The bias training started on Monday of the 2nd week. Dr. Keisha Williams met her at a small office downtown. No cameras, no reporters, just the 2 of them. Keisha was 45, black, PhD in organizational psychology from Stanford. She'd spent 20 years studying implicit bias in corporate environments. She didn't seem impressed by Margaret. "Let's get something clear from the start," Keisha said. "I'm not here to make you feel better. I'm not here to tell you you're a good person who made a mistake. I'm here to help you understand why you did what you did and how to do differently. That's it." "I understand. Do you—" Keisha leaned forward. "Because most people in your position, powerful, wealthy, used to being right. They come into this thinking they'll learn some tricks, say the right words, and go back to their lives. That's not how this works." "How does it work?" "It works by breaking you down first, by making you see things you've spent your whole life not seeing, by forcing you to confront the fact that everything you believe about yourself might be wrong." Keisha paused. "It's painful. Most people quit." "I won't quit." "We'll see." The first session lasted 3 hours. Keisha started with questions, simple ones at first. When you walked into a room full of people you didn't know, what did you notice first? Margaret thought about it. Faces, I suppose. Who seemed important? Who seemed approachable? How did you determine who was important? Their clothes, their posture, how others treated them. What about race? Margaret hesitated. I didn't think I noticed race. But you did, with Isaiah Bennett. That was different. How? He was... Margaret stopped, searched for words. He didn't fit the context. A black man didn't fit the context of a business meeting. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Margaret couldn't answer. Keisha nodded slowly. That's where we start. The sessions continued, 3 times a week, 3 hours each. Keisha pushed Margaret into corners she didn't know existed, made her examine memories she'd buried, made her confront patterns she'd never acknowledged. Tell me about the first black person you remember meeting. I was young. Our housekeeper, maybe? What do you remember about her? She was nice, quiet. She made good cookies. What was her name? Margaret's mind went blank. I don't remember. She worked in your house, made you cookies, and you don't remember her name. I was a child. You were old enough to remember the cookies. Silence. "Do you see the pattern yet, Margaret?" Margaret saw it. She hated seeing it, but she saw it. The black people in her life had always been there. Housekeepers, doormen, service workers, present but invisible, useful but unnamed, and somewhere along the way that invisibility had become her default, her normal. She'd stopped seeing black people as individuals, stopped wondering about their lives, their stories, their dreams. They were just there, part of the background, not quite real. Until Isaiah Bennett forced her to see what she'd been doing all along. Week 3 brought the cultural audit results. Margaret sat in a conference room with Michael Torres, Helen Park, and the external auditors. Her stomach was in knots. The lead auditor, a stern woman named Patricia, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Our team reviewed hiring records, promotion data, compensation structures, and conducted confidential interviews with over 400 employees across all 12 properties." Patricia opened her laptop. "The findings are significant." Margaret braced herself. Over the past 10 years, black employees at Sterling hotels were promoted at 43% lower rates than white employees with equivalent qualifications and tenure. The number hit Margaret like a physical blow. Hispanic employees were promoted at 31% lower rates. Asian employees at 22% lower. Michael Torres's face was stone. Helen Park was taking notes. Neither looked surprised. Compensation analysis shows similar patterns. Black employees in management positions earned an average of 12% less than white counterparts in identical roles. Hispanic employees earned 9% less. Patricia continued. The numbers kept coming, each one worse than the last. In exit interviews conducted over the past 5 years, 67% of departing employees of color cited cultural fit issues as a factor in their decision to leave. When asked to elaborate, common themes included being passed over for opportunities, having ideas credited to white colleagues, and experiencing microaggressions in daily interactions. Margaret felt sick. Perhaps most significantly, our review of HR complaints found that complaints filed by employees of color were resolved in the complainant's favor only 18% of the time. Complaints filed by white employees were resolved favorably 64% of the time. Patricia closed her laptop. In summary, Sterling Hotels has a systemic discrimination problem. It affects hiring, promotion, compensation, and workplace culture. It has existed for at least a decade, likely longer. The room was silent. Michael spoke first. "What are your recommendations?" "Complete overhaul of HR processes. Mandatory bias training for all managers. External review of all compensation structures. Creation of an employee resource group with real authority. Quarterly diversity metrics with consequences for underperformance." Patricia paused. "And public release of these findings as agreed in Mr. Bennett's conditions." Margaret looked at the numbers on the screen. 43%, 67%, 18%. Those weren't just statistics. Those were people. Hundreds of people who'd worked hard, done their jobs, and been held back because of the color of their skin, because of her blindness, because of her failure. "Release it," Margaret said quietly. Michael looked at her. "Are you sure this will release it?" Margaret's voice was stronger now. "No hiding. That was the deal. And honestly, these people deserve to know that someone finally saw what happened to them." Patricia nodded. "We'll have the public report ready within 48 hours. The report dropped on a Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, it was everywhere. 3 former employees filed lawsuits by Monday, 2 more by Wednesday. The complaints were detailed, damning, and impossible to ignore. Margaret's lawyers called, advised her to distance herself, protect her assets, prepare for litigation. She refused. "I'm not hiding anymore," she told them. "Whatever they're asking for, we negotiate in good faith. These people were wronged. They deserve compensation." "Mrs. Whitmore, you could be personally liable for..." I should be personally liable. I was the CEO. It happened on my watch. I'm responsible. The lawyers tried to argue. Margaret hung up. The settlements came over the following months. 7 figures paid from Margaret's personal accounts. It hurt, but it felt right. Through it all, the training continued. Keisha didn't let up. If anything, she pushed harder as the weeks went on. Tell me about your closest friends. I have several, from college, from the country club, from... How many are black? Margaret was quiet. How many are Hispanic Asian? Any race other than white? Still quiet. You've lived 62 years, Margaret. You've met thousands of people, and you don't have a single close friend who isn't white. Keisha's voice wasn't accusatory, just factual. What does that tell you? That I've been living in a bubble. A bubble you built, a bubble you maintained, a bubble that felt so normal you didn't even know it was there. Margaret nodded slowly. Breaking out of that bubble is going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel wrong. Every instinct you have is going to tell you to go back to what's familiar. Keisha leaned forward. That discomfort is the point. It means you're actually changing. Margaret felt that discomfort daily. At the grocery store, she found herself noticing who she made eye contact with, who she smiled at, who she avoided. At restaurants, she noticed who she assumed was staff and who she assumed was a guest. Walking down the street, she noticed who she crossed to avoid, who made her grip her purse tighter, who made her look away. The patterns were everywhere, decades of conditioning woven so deep into her brain that she'd never seen them. Now she couldn't unsee them. Month 4 brought an unexpected visitor. Margaret was at home reviewing materials for her next session with Keisha when the doorbell rang. She opened it. Jerome stood on her doorstep. The security guard from the Four Seasons. The older black man who'd escorted Isaiah out of the lobby. The one whose eyes had been filled with pain. Margaret's breath caught. Mr. She realized she didn't know his last name. Jerome Washington. He didn't smile. May I come in? Margaret stepped aside. Of course. They sat in her living room. 2 people who'd been on opposite sides of one of the worst moments in Margaret's life. I saw your press conference, Jerome said. I saw the audit results. I've been following what you're doing. I'm trying. I know. Jerome was quiet for a moment. I worked at the Four Seasons for 18 years. Before that, I was a police officer in Detroit for 12 years. Before that, I served 2 tours in Vietnam. Margaret didn't know what to say. In all those years, in all those jobs, I've seen what you did 100 times, 1,000 times. People looking at me and deciding I don't belong, deciding I'm not good enough, deciding I'm dangerous or criminal or less than human. Jerome's voice was steady. Most of them never apologized. Most of them never even knew they did it. I'm sorry for what I put you in the middle of. I'm not here for an apology. Then why are you here? Jerome looked at her. Really looked. The kind of look that sees past the surface. Because in 45 years of dealing with people like you, I've never seen one actually try to change. I've seen them apologize when they got caught. I've seen them donate money to make themselves feel better. I've seen them hire a few black executives to check a box. He paused. But I've never seen one actually sit down and do the work, actually try to understand. Margaret felt tears building. I'm trying. I know. Jerome stood up. That's why I came. To tell you that what you're doing matters. Not just for Isaiah Bennett, not just for your employees, but for every black person who's ever been looked at the way you looked at him. He walked toward the door. Mr. Washington? He turned. What was it like being asked to escort him out? Jerome was quiet for a long moment. It was like being asked to betray my own brother, my own son. His voice dropped. I've had to do that my whole career. Stand there while people like me got treated like less than nothing. Smile and say, "Yes, ma'am," while my stomach turned. Pretend it didn't hurt when it hurt every single time. Margaret felt the weight of his words. The look Isaiah gave me when he walked out that door, I'll never forget it. It wasn't angry. It wasn't resentful. It was just understanding. Like he knew exactly what it cost me to do my job that day. Jerome opened the door. "I hope you become the person you're trying to become, Mrs. Whitmore. I really do." Then he was gone. Margaret stood in her empty living room. She thought about every security guard, every bellhop, every housekeeper, every person of color who'd been forced to participate in moments like the one she'd created. The weight of it was crushing. But beneath the weight, something else grew. Resolution. She had 7 months of training left. 7 months of work. 7 months of breaking down the person she'd been and building someone better. It wouldn't be enough. A lifetime wouldn't be enough. But she would try anyway. Because Jerome Washington had walked into her home and given her something she didn't deserve. Hope. And she would not waste it. The documentary crew arrived on a Tuesday morning. Margaret had agreed to participate 3 weeks earlier. A filmmaker named David Chen wanted to tell the full story. Not just the viral moment, not just the press conference, everything. "I want to show what happens after," David had said on the phone. "Everyone sees the scandal. Nobody sees the work." Margaret had hesitated. More exposure meant more pain, more judgment, more strangers dissecting her worst moments, but Keisha had encouraged her. "Accountability isn't just about admitting what you did," she'd said. "It's about letting people see the process, the ugly, uncomfortable process of actually changing." So Margaret said yes. David arrived with a 2-person crew. Camera operator, sound tech, nothing fancy, nothing staged. "I want to follow you for 6 weeks," he said. "Training sessions, board meetings, whatever you're willing to share." "Everything," Margaret said. "I'm done hiding." The first interview lasted 4 hours. David's questions were surgical, precise. He didn't let her off the hook. "When you saw Isaiah Bennett in the lobby, what went through your mind?" Margaret had answered this question 100 times, in therapy, in training, in her own head at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. "I saw a threat," she said quietly. "A threat. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who was going to cause problems. Someone I needed to remove. Because of how he was dressed. Because of how he looked. All of it. The clothes, the skin, the way he walked in like he had every right to be there." Margaret's voice caught. "Because he did have every right. And somewhere deep down, that scared me." "Why would that scare you?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Because my whole life, I'd been the one who belonged. I walked into rooms and people made space for me. They smiled. They deferred. They assumed I was important." She paused. "When Isaiah walked in with that same confidence, my brain couldn't process it. A black man in casual clothes acting like he owned the place. That didn't fit my categories. So I put him in the only category that made sense to me. Which was outsider, intruder, someone who needed to be put back in his place." David nodded slowly. "And now? Now I understand that those categories were always wrong. I just couldn't see it because they benefited me." The footage would be brutal. Margaret knew that, but she also knew it needed to exist. Month 5 of the training brought Margaret's hardest session yet. Keisha walked in with a folder. Thick, heavy. She set it on the table between them. "I want you to read these." Margaret opened the folder. Inside were dozens of letters, handwritten, typed. Some just a few lines, some pages long. "What are these?" "Letters from employees, current and former. People who heard about what you're doing and wanted to share their experiences." Margaret felt her stomach drop. The first letter was from a woman named Teresa. She'd worked as a housekeeper at the Chicago property for 12 years. I cleaned Mrs. Whitmore's office every night for 3 years. She never learned my name. One time she walked in while I was emptying her trash. She looked at me like I was invisible, like I was part of the furniture. I went home that night and cried because I realized that to her, I didn't exist. The second letter was from a man named Marcus, front desk manager, Atlanta property. I applied for the assistant GM position 3 times. 3 times they gave it to someone with less experience, someone white. When I finally got promoted, my new boss told me I'd have to work twice as hard to earn respect. I asked him why. He said, "You know why." The third letter, the fourth, the fifth. Story after story, pain after pain. Margaret read them all, every single one. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking. Her face was wet with tears. "These are my employees," she said. "People I was supposed to protect, people I was supposed to lead." Yes. And I failed them. Every single one of them. Keisha didn't argue, didn't comfort, just waited. "How do I make this right?" Margaret's voice broke. "How do I ever make this right? You can't." The words hit like a slap. Some harm can't be undone, Margaret. Some pain can't be erased. These people gave years of their lives to a company that treated them as less than human. You can't give those years back. You can't undo the damage to their careers, their confidence, their sense of self-worth. Then what's the point? What's the point of any of this? Keisha leaned forward. The point is that you stop doing it. The point is that the next Teresa doesn't spend 3 years feeling invisible. The point is that the next Marcus doesn't get passed over because of his skin color. She paused. You can't fix the past, but you can change the future. That's all any of us can do. Margaret looked at the stack of letters. I want to respond to them, every single one. That's not required. I know. I want to anyway. It took her 3 weeks, 47 letters, each one handwritten, each one personal. She didn't make excuses, didn't defend herself, just acknowledged what they'd experienced and apologized for her role in creating the culture that hurt them. Most never responded. A few did. Teresa wrote back, I didn't think you'd actually read my letter. I didn't think you'd care. Thank you for seeing me. Finally. That letter sat on Margaret's nightstand for months. She read it every morning when she woke up. The documentary crew followed Margaret to her first public speaking engagement. A business school had invited her to address their MBA students. Topic: Leadership, Accountability, and the Cost of Unconscious Bias. Margaret stood backstage, hands trembling. This wasn't a press conference where she read a prepared statement. This was a conversation, questions, pushback. Students who'd grown up in a different world seeing race differently than she ever had. You okay? David asked from behind his camera. No. Margaret straightened her jacket. But that's probably the point. The auditorium was packed. 300 students. Faculty members lining the walls. Local press in the back row. Margaret walked to the podium. The applause was polite but thin. These students knew who she was. They'd seen the video, read the articles, formed their opinions. She didn't blame them. 6 months ago, she began. I destroyed a man's dignity in front of 50 people. I refused to shake his hand because of how he looked. I called security on him. I had him thrown out of my hotel like he was garbage. No sugarcoating, no warm-up, straight to the wound. That man was Isaiah Bennett, a billionaire investor who came to save my company. But here's what I've learned in the 6 months since it wouldn't have mattered if he was a billionaire or a bus driver. What I did was wrong either way. She talked for 20 minutes, about her childhood, about the bubble she'd lived in, about the blindness she'd mistaken for fairness. Then she opened for questions. A young black woman in the front row raised her hand first. "Mrs. Whitmore, you talked about unconscious bias. But what you did seemed pretty conscious to me. You made a choice. How do you reconcile that?" Margaret felt the weight of the question. "You're right," she said. "In the moment, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like instinct, automatic. But that's the dangerous part. Those instincts were shaped by 60 years of conditioning, 60 years of learning who belongs and who doesn't, who deserves respect and who doesn't." She paused. "The conditioning was unconscious. The action was conscious. I'm responsible for both." A white male student near the middle raised his hand. "Do you think all this, the training, the public apology, the documentary, do you think it's enough? Or is it just performance?" "I ask myself that every day." Margaret's voice was honest, raw. "I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if anything is ever enough. What I know is that I'm doing it anyway, because the alternative is going back to who I was, and I can't be that person anymore." Another hand. A young Asian man. "What would you say to executives who think this can't happen to them, who think they're not biased?" Margaret almost laughed. "I would say I was you. 6 months ago, I was absolutely certain I wasn't biased. I voted the right way, donated to the right causes, had the right opinions." She shook her head. "None of that mattered, because I'd never actually examined myself. I'd never sat with my discomfort. I'd never asked why I crossed the street when certain people walked toward me, why I clutched my purse in certain elevators, why I assumed certain people were staff and others were guests." She looked out at the students. "If you think you're immune to bias, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to examine yourself most." The Q&A lasted an hour. Margaret answered everything. The hostile questions, the sympathetic ones, the ones designed to trap her. By the end, something had shifted in the room. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but something like respect, or at least acknowledgement. One student approached her afterward, a young black man. Couldn't have been more than 23. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes." "My mom worked at your Atlanta property for 8 years, housekeeping." Margaret's heart seized. She talked about it sometimes, how invisible she felt, how she was never considered for anything better. "I'm sorry." "I know." The young man paused. "She watched your press conference, the whole thing, and she cried." Margaret felt tears building. "Not sad tears," he continued. "Something else. She said it was the first time in her whole career that anyone in power admitted what she'd experienced was real, that it wasn't in her head." He extended his hand. "Thank you for that, for telling the truth." Margaret shook his hand, held it for a moment longer than necessary. "What's your mother's name?" "Denise. Denise Carter." Margaret made a mental note. Another letter to write. "Thank you, Denise," she said quietly, "for raising someone like you." The documentary aired 8 months after the incident at the Four Seasons. The Sterling Incident. A story of bias, accountability, and change. 60 minutes. Network television. Prime time slot. Margaret watched it alone in her living room. She'd seen rough cuts during editing, knew what was coming. But watching the final version, knowing millions of others were watching the same thing at the same moment, that was different. The documentary opened with security camera footage from the lobby. Grainy, silent, but unmistakable. Margaret pointing at Isaiah. Her face twisted with disgust. Security approaching. Isaiah walking out with his head high. Then her voice from the interview. "I saw a threat. Someone who didn't belong." Cut to Isaiah speaking for the first time publicly about the incident. "I've been misjudged my whole life, mistaken for waiters, security guards, the help. Every successful black person has stories like this." His voice was calm, measured. But there was something about that moment, the way she looked at me, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I didn't belong in her world. Cut back to Margaret. When I look at that footage now, I don't recognize myself. But that's a lie. I do recognize myself. I just don't want to. The documentary traced her journey, the training sessions with Keisha, the cultural audit, the letters from employees, the speaking engagement at the business school. It also traced the company's transformation under Michael Torres. New hiring practices, new promotion criteria, employee resource groups with real authority, quarterly diversity metrics posted publicly. The company Margaret built isn't gone, Michael said in his interview, but it's being rebuilt, from the inside out. The final segment featured both Margaret and Isaiah. They hadn't spoken since the conference room meeting in Atlanta. 8 months of silence. But David had convinced them both to participate in a closing interview. They sat across from each other, no table between them, just 2 chairs and a decade of history that couldn't be erased. Margaret. Isaiah's voice was neutral. How does it feel watching this documentary? Like being dissected in public. Margaret didn't flinch. Which is appropriate. I dissected you in public. It's only fair. Do you think you've changed? The question every interviewer had asked. But from Isaiah, it carried different weight. I think I'm changing, Margaret said carefully. I don't know if I've arrived anywhere. I don't know if I ever will. But I'm different than I was 8 months ago. I see things I didn't see before. I question instincts I used to trust. She paused. Whether that's enough, I don't know. Isaiah studied her for a long moment. When I walked out of your hotel that day, I made a decision. I was never going to work with you. Never going to invest. Never going to give you a second thought. He paused. But then I watched your press conference, and I saw something I didn't expect. What? Honesty. Not the polished PR kind, the ugly kind. The kind that costs something. Margaret felt tears threatening. She held them back. That's why I gave you conditions instead of walking away. Not because I forgave you. Not because I thought you deserved it. But because real accountability, real change is so rare that it needs to be supported when it happens. He leaned forward. Do I trust you? No. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I respect what you're trying to do. And in a world full of people who never try at all that matters. The documentary ended with text on screen. Margaret Whitmore completed 12 months of bias training as required. Sterling Hotels met all diversity targets within the agreed timeline. Isaiah Bennett's investment saved 500 jobs. Final frame. Real change isn't a moment, it's a practice. The aftermath was overwhelming. Margaret's phone rang constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, book deals. She turned most of them down. I'm not ready to profit from this, she told her agent. Maybe someday, not now. But some opportunities she accepted. Schools that wanted her to speak to students. Companies that wanted her to consult on their own diversity initiatives. Organizations that wanted to learn from Sterling's transformation. She always did it for free. One call came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Jerome Washington. Margaret sat up straighter. Jerome, how are you? I watched the documentary, my wife and I. She cried through most of it. I hope it was helpful. It was. Jerome paused. I wanted to tell you something. Something I should have said when I visited. What's that? When you first arrived at the Four Seasons that day before Isaiah showed up, I saw you walk through the lobby. You walked past me like I was invisible. Didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge me. Just through me. Margaret closed her eyes. Another wound. Another failure. I've worked there 18 years. You probably walked past me 100 times. Never once said hello. Jerome, I'm so... Let me finish. His voice was gentle. Last week I was in the lobby. New guest came in. White woman. Designer clothes. The whole package. She walked past me exactly like you used to. Margaret waited. But here's the thing. It bothered me less. Why? Because I watched your documentary. I watched you admit that you used to do the same thing. I watched you sit with it. Feel the shame of it. Try to be different. Jerome's voice caught slightly. And I realized if you can see it, if you can change, then maybe others can too. Maybe it's not hopeless. Margaret couldn't speak. The tears she'd been holding back finally broke free. You gave me something, Mrs. Whitmore. Hope. Real hope. For the first time in 45 years, I believe things can actually get better. Jerome. Margaret wiped her eyes. I should be thanking you. You came to my house when you had every reason to hate me. You gave me hope first. Then we're even. A long silence. Not uncomfortable, just full. What's your wife's name, Jerome? Barbara. Will you tell Barbara I said thank you for sharing you with me that day? I will. Margaret hung up the phone. She sat in her empty house in the silence and let herself feel the weight of the past 8 months. The pain, the shame, the growth, the slow, agonizing process of becoming someone different. She wasn't redeemed. She knew that. Redemption wasn't hers to claim. But she was different, and maybe different was enough. The Sterling Hotel's annual investor summit was scheduled for the 1-year anniversary of the incident. Same hotel. Same lobby. Same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed Margaret's worst moment. She arrived early, stood in the exact spot where she'd refused to shake Isaiah's hand. The bellhop from that day, the young black man whose name she'd never known, was still working there. His name tag said Marcus. She'd learned that since. Marcus. He looked up surprised. Mrs. Whitmore. I never apologized to you for what you witnessed that day, for what you had to stand there and watch. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Margaret met his eyes. I made you complicit in something shameful. You had to watch me humiliate a man who looked like you, and you couldn't say anything because I had power over your job. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I thought about quitting that day, he said finally. Almost did. But I have a daughter. She's 4. I need this job. You shouldn't have to choose between your dignity and your paycheck. That's the world I live in, Mrs. Whitmore. I know. Margaret's voice was heavy. I'm trying to change that. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm trying. Marcus studied her, the same assessing look so many people had given her over the past year. I believe you, he said finally. I didn't before, but I do now. It was the smallest grace, the tiniest victory. Margaret held onto it like a lifeline. The lobby began to fill with investors, board members, press. Michael Torres took the stage for opening remarks. Helen Park sat in the front row. The executive team behind her was visibly different than a year ago. More faces of color, more women, more visible diversity. Margaret sat in the back. She wasn't speaking today, wasn't presenting, just watching. At 9:00 a.m. exactly, the lobby doors opened. Isaiah Bennett walked in. Gray polo, khakis, white sneakers. The same outfit he'd worn a year ago. Maybe the exact same clothes. Margaret's breath caught. He walked through the lobby, past the champagne bar, past the bellhops, past all the same people who'd watched him get thrown out 12 months earlier. This time, no one called security. This time, Michael Torres crossed the lobby to meet him. Mr. Bennett? Michael extended his hand. Welcome to Sterling Hotels. Isaiah shook it firmly. Thank you for having me. Margaret watched from the back of the room. Her eyes stung, but she didn't look away. This was what change looked like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a black man walking into a lobby and being treated with basic human dignity. It should have always been this way. It hadn't been, but it was now. And for the first time in a year, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since that morning in the Four Seasons lobby. Hope. Not for herself. She'd given up hoping for herself long ago. But for the world her company might help build. For the culture her failure might help change. For the next person who walked into a room dressed differently, looked differently, existed differently than the people in power expected. Maybe they wouldn't be thrown out. Maybe they would be welcomed. Maybe that was the only redemption that mattered. Margaret watched Isaiah move through the lobby like she was watching a ghost. He shook hands with executives, smiled at employees, stopped to speak with a young black woman at the reception desk. She said something that made him laugh. A year ago, that laugh would have seemed impossible. A year ago, Margaret would have had him thrown out before he reached the elevator. The investor summit lasted 3 hours. Presentations, financial reports, forward projections. Sterling Hotels had turned around completely. Revenue up. Employee satisfaction up. Public perception transformed from pariah to example. Margaret sat through all of it, took notes, asked no questions, made no speeches. She wasn't the leader anymore. She was a witness. When the summit ended, the crowd dispersed for lunch. Margaret stayed in her seat watching the empty stage, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. "Mrs. Whitmore." She looked up. Isaiah stood at the end of her row, same calm expression, same unreadable eyes. "Mr. Bennett." "Mind if I sit?" Margaret gestured to the empty chair beside her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her face composed. Isaiah sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither was sure could hold their weight. "You didn't speak today," Isaiah said finally. "It's not my company anymore. It's still your family's legacy. Legacies change." Margaret looked at him. "Sometimes they need to." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I watched you during the presentations. You were different." "Different how?" "Quiet, observant, listening instead of performing." He paused. "A year ago, you would have been at that podium, center of attention, making sure everyone knew how important you were. A year ago, I was a different person." "Were you?" The question hung in the air. Margaret thought about it, really thought. "No," she said finally. "I was the same person. I just didn't know it. Now I know who I was. Who I still am in some ways. The difference is awareness. And what do you do with that awareness? I try to choose differently. Every day, every interaction, every moment when my old instincts try to take over." Margaret's voice dropped. "Sometimes I succeed. Sometimes I don't. But I keep trying." Isaiah studied her for a long moment. Then he did something Margaret didn't expect. He extended his hand. Margaret stared at it. The same hand she'd refused to shake 1 year ago. The hand she'd recoiled from like it was diseased. The hand that represented everything she'd been too blind to see. Her own hand trembled as she reached out. Their palms met. Firm, warm, human. "This isn't forgiveness," Isaiah said quietly. "I need you to understand that." "I know. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive what happened. Some wounds don't heal. Some moments can't be erased. I know. But this," Isaiah squeezed her hand slightly, "this is acknowledgement. That you tried. That you did the work. That you showed up when you could have hidden." Margaret felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me the chance to try." Isaiah released her hand, stood up, looked down at her with something that might have been respect. "Thank yourself, Mrs. Whitmore. I gave you conditions. You met them. That was your choice." He turned to leave. "Isaiah." He paused. "Why did you really give me a chance?" Margaret's voice was barely audible. That day in Atlanta. You could have walked away. You should have walked away. Why didn't you? Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. Because I've spent my whole life watching people like you face no consequences. Get away with everything. Keep their power while people like me paid the price. He turned back to face her. I wanted to see if change was possible. Real change. Not the performance. The real thing. And the jury's still out. Isaiah's voice softened slightly. But you gave me hope. Not much, but some. And in this world, some hope is worth protecting. Then he walked away. Margaret sat alone in the empty auditorium. The lights dimmed around her. The cleaning crew began moving chairs. She didn't move. She just sat there holding her right hand in her left, feeling the ghost of Isaiah's grip. A year ago, she'd refused that hand. Today, she'd taken it. The distance between those two moments was measured in pain and shame and work. So much work. But she'd traveled it, and that had to mean something. 2 weeks after the summit, Margaret received an invitation she never expected. Isaiah Bennett was speaking at a conference for Black entrepreneurs. 3,000 attendees, national press, keynote address. The invitation came through his assistant, handwritten note attached. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like you to be part of a panel discussion on accountability and change in corporate America, not as a reformed villain, not as a cautionary tale, as someone who did the work and might have something valuable to share. Let me know. IB. Margaret read the note 7 times. She called Keisha immediately. He wants me on a panel, at a conference for Black entrepreneurs. Me. How do you feel about that? Terrified, unworthy, like I'm going to make everything worse. Good. Keisha's voice was warm. That means you're taking it seriously. The Margaret from a year ago wouldn't have hesitated. She would have seen it as an opportunity to rehabilitate her image. Isn't it? Only if you treat it that way. Keisha paused. Why do you think Isaiah invited you? Margaret thought about it. Because he thinks I might help. Help how? I don't know. Show that change is possible, that even the worst people can try to be better. Do you believe that? I'm trying to. Then accept the invitation. And Margaret. Yes. Don't perform. Don't try to be inspirational. Just be honest. That's what got you this far. The conference was in Atlanta. 3,000 people packed into a convention center. The energy was unlike anything Margaret had ever experienced. Black excellence everywhere she looked. Entrepreneurs, investors, innovators. People who'd built empires against odds Margaret could barely imagine. She felt small, insignificant, deeply aware that she didn't belong here. But maybe that was the point. The panel was scheduled for the second day. 4 speakers. Isaiah as moderator. A Black female CEO who'd built a tech company from nothing. A Hispanic entrepreneur who'd revolutionized the restaurant industry. And Margaret, the outlier, the cautionary tale. The woman who'd done the very thing this entire room had experienced. Backstage, Margaret's hands shook so badly she couldn't hold her water bottle. The Hispanic entrepreneur, his name was Carlos, noticed. Nervous. Terrified. Good. He smiled. Means you understand what you're walking into. I don't understand anything. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I could possibly say to these people that would matter. Carlos studied her for a moment. You know why Isaiah invited you? No. Because every person in that room has been treated the way you treated him. Every single one. Multiple times. By people who never faced consequences, who never apologized, who never changed. Carlos's voice was gentle. You're proof that accountability is possible. That's rare. That matters. I'm also proof that bias exists in people who swear they're not biased. That matters too. The stage manager appeared. 5 minutes. Margaret felt her stomach drop. Carlos put a hand on her shoulder. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone's asking. The panel began. Isaiah introduced each speaker. When he got to Margaret, the room went quiet. 3,000 people staring at the woman from the viral video. The woman who'd refused to shake a black man's hand. Margaret Whitmore, Isaiah said, former CEO of Sterling Hotels. You all know her story. You've seen the video. You've watched the documentary. He paused. I invited her here because I believe we need to talk about what happens after the viral moment. What real accountability looks like, and whether change is actually possible. The first question came from a young black woman in the front row. Mrs. Whitmore, what makes you qualified to speak on accountability? You're the one who caused the harm. Margaret felt the hostility, understood it, welcomed it. You're right, she said. I'm not qualified to speak on how to receive accountability, but I might be qualified to speak on what it takes to give it. She paused. Most people who do what I did never face consequences. They apologize if they get caught. They donate to charity. They hire a PR firm. And then they go back to exactly who they were. She looked out at the audience. I was offered that path. Multiple lawyers, multiple PR firms, all telling me how to minimize the damage, protect my reputation, wait for it to blow over. Margaret's voice hardened. I didn't take that path. Not because I'm a good person, I'm not sure I am, but because Isaiah Bennett gave me conditions that required real change. And once I started the work, I couldn't stop. Because I finally saw what I'd been doing my whole life. And I couldn't unsee it. Another question. An older black man. You talk about change, but how do we know it's real? How do we know you won't go back to who you were the moment the cameras turn off? You don't. Margaret's answer was immediate, honest. I can't prove anything to you. I can only keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep making choices that reflect who I'm trying to become instead of who I was. She paused. But here's what I can tell you. The old me would have walked into this room looking for redemption. Looking for you to tell me I'm okay now, that I've done enough, that I can stop feeling ashamed. She looked at the man who'd asked the question. I'm not looking for that anymore. I know I'll never be okay. I know I'll never have done enough. I know the shame isn't something I get to put down. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm here because Isaiah asked me to be. Because maybe my story helps someone else understand that the people who hurt them are capable of change, not entitled to forgiveness, just capable of becoming something different. The room was silent. Isaiah spoke. Margaret, what was the hardest part of the past year? Margaret thought about the question. There were so many answers. The public humiliation, the lawsuits, the letters from employees, the sessions with Keisha that broke her down to nothing. Reading the letters, she said finally. From employees who'd experienced discrimination under my leadership. Hundreds of stories. Hundreds of people who'd been hurt by a culture I created. Why was that hardest? Because it wasn't abstract anymore. These weren't statistics or audit findings. These were human beings with names and faces and families. People who went home at night feeling invisible, feeling less than, feeling like they didn't matter. Margaret's voice dropped. I made them feel that way. Not directly, maybe. But the culture I built, the example I set, the things I didn't see, because I chose not to look, all of that, created a place where people suffered. She wiped her eyes. I can't fix that. I can't give them back the years they spent feeling small. I can't undo the careers that were stunted, the promotions that were denied, the opportunities that went to someone else because of skin color instead of qualification. She looked out at 3,000 faces. But I can stand here and tell you that it was real. That your experiences in workplaces like mine were real. That the bias you felt wasn't in your head. That the system was rigged against you and people like me either didn't see it or didn't want to see it. Margaret's voice strengthened. I see it now, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make sure fewer people have to go through what my employees went through. The panel continued for another hour. Questions about corporate accountability, about systemic change, about whether diversity initiatives actually worked or just provided cover. Margaret answered every question honestly. No spin, no PR language, just truth. By the end, something had shifted in the room. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but something like acknowledgement. This woman had done harm. She'd owned it. She was trying to do better. That didn't erase anything, but it meant something. After the panel, Margaret stood in the hallway backstage, exhausted, emotionally drained, unsure if she'd helped or made things worse. A young black woman approached, maybe 25, professional clothes, nervous energy. Mrs. Whitmore. Yes. My name is Jasmine. I work for a company in Dallas, big tech firm, mostly white leadership. Margaret nodded, waited. I've experienced some of the things those letters talked about. Being passed over, being treated like I don't belong, having my ideas credited to other people. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about quitting. Jasmine's voice shook slightly. Just walking away, starting over somewhere else. But after listening to you today, she stopped, started again. You said you see it now. The bias, the systems, all of it. Jasmine's eyes were wet. That gives me hope that maybe my boss can see it too. Maybe my company can change. Maybe I don't have to give up. Margaret felt the weight of the moment. Jasmine, I can't promise you anything. I can't tell you your boss will change or your company will get better. Some people never change. Some systems are too broken to fix. She paused. But if you want to try, if you want to fight for the change from the inside, I'll help however I can. Advice, resources, connections, whatever you need. Jasmine stared at her. You'd do that for someone you just met. I spent 60 years taking from people like you, taking opportunity, taking dignity, taking hope. Margaret met her eyes. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left giving some of it back. Jasmine hugged her. It was sudden, unexpected. A stranger's arms wrapped around Margaret in a convention center hallway. Margaret hugged back, held on tight. When they separated, both were crying. Thank you, Jasmine whispered. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for letting me try. Jasmine walked away. Margaret watched her go. One person, one moment, one small act of connection. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The anniversary came on a Thursday. 1 year to the day since Margaret had refused to shake Isaiah Bennett's hand. She spent the morning alone. No interviews. No speaking engagements. Just silence and reflection. At noon, she drove to the Four Seasons. The lobby looked exactly the same. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors. The same champagne bar where she'd been laughing with Klaus Hoffmann when Isaiah walked through the door. Margaret stood in the center of the room. Employees moved around her. Guests checked in and out. Life continued indifferent to her presence. Marcus the bellhop noticed her first. Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus. You okay? You look... He searched for the word. Thoughtful. Just remembering. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood. I remember too, he said quietly. Every detail. The look on his face. The look on yours. How quiet the lobby got. I'm sorry you had to witness that. I'm not. Marcus's answer surprised her. I'm sorry it happened, but watching you try to make it right, that meant something to me. Why? Because I've been watching white people do terrible things to black people my whole life, and I've never not once seen one of them actually try to change. Marcus's voice was steady. You tried. You're still trying. That doesn't fix what happened. But it makes me believe that maybe things can get better. Margaret felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, for showing up, even when you didn't have to. That evening, Margaret received one final surprise. A knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it. Isaiah Bennett stood on her doorstep. Same casual clothes, same calm expression, same man who'd changed her life by being exactly who he was. "May I come in?" Margaret stepped aside without a word. They sat in her living room. The same room where Jerome had visited. The same room where she'd cried herself empty a year ago. "I thought about calling," Isaiah said, "but this felt like something that should happen in person." "What's happening?" Isaiah reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, set it on the coffee table between them. "Open it." Margaret's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter. She read it, then read it again, then looked up at Isaiah with tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand." "It's an invitation," Isaiah said, "to join the board of the Bennett Foundation. We fund minority entrepreneurs, provide mentorship, create opportunities for people who grew up like I did." "But I'm the last person who should." "You're exactly the person." Isaiah's voice was firm. "Margaret, I've watched you for a year. I've watched you do the work. I've watched you show up in rooms where you weren't welcome and tell the truth anyway. I've watched you take hits that would have destroyed most people and keep going." He leaned forward. "The foundation needs people who understand how bias works from the inside, who can recognize it, name it, help dismantle it. You have knowledge most people don't knowledge about how white institutions exclude people without even realizing they're doing it. You want me to use that knowledge? I want you to turn it into a weapon." Isaiah's eyes were intense. "Every instinct that used to keep people like me out, I want you to help us fight against it. Every blind spot that executives like you have, I want you to expose it. Every system that's rigged against us, I want you to help us break it." Margaret stared at the letter. A year ago, she'd been a successful CEO with everything she thought she wanted. Today, she was being invited to help build something she'd spent her whole life unconsciously opposing. "I don't deserve this." "Probably not." Isaiah almost smiled. "But you've earned the chance to try." Margaret looked at him. The man she'd humiliated. The man who'd demanded she change. The man who was now offering her a purpose she'd never imagined. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything I did, why would you give me this?" Isaiah was quiet for a long moment. "My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me, cleaned houses, washed dishes, did laundry for white families who never learned her name." His voice was soft. "She used to tell me something when I'd come home angry about how I'd been treated. She'd say, 'Isaiah, hate is heavy. Don't carry what you don't need.'" He looked at Margaret. "I'm not carrying hate for you anymore. It's too heavy. And honestly, it's more useful to have you on our side than to stay angry at you for the rest of my life." Margaret broke. The sobs came from somewhere she didn't know existed. Deep, wrenching sounds that shook her whole body. A year of shame and work and hope and fear, all of it pouring out in her living room while Isaiah Bennett watched. He didn't comfort her, didn't touch her, just let her feel what she needed to feel. When it finally stopped, Margaret was empty, hollowed out, but clean somehow, like she'd been carrying poison and had finally let it go. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice was raw, broken. "I'll do whatever you need, whatever helps." Isaiah nodded. "First board meeting is next month. Bring everything you know about how companies like yours keep people out. We're going to use it to break down doors." He stood up. "And Margaret, yes. This isn't the ending. This is the beginning. The real work starts now." He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing. My mother's name was Dorothy Bennett. She died 3 years ago. Never got to see me become successful. Never got to see any of this." His voice caught slightly. "I think she would have liked you. Not the old you. This you. The one who's trying." Then he was gone. Margaret sat alone in her living room, The letter lay on the coffee table, an invitation to a future she'd never imagined. A chance to use everything she'd learned about bias, about blindness, about the systems that hurt people, without anyone noticing, to help instead of harm. She thought about Dorothy Bennett, a woman who cleaned houses and raised a billionaire. A woman who taught her son not to carry hate. She thought about Jerome Washington, a man who'd spent 45 years watching people like Margaret hurt people like him. A man who'd knocked on her door and offered hope. She thought about Marcus the bellhop, Jasmine in the convention center, Teresa, whose letter still sat on her nightstand, all the people whose names she was finally learning. She thought about Isaiah, the man who'd refused to let her off the hook, who'd demanded everything she had, who'd watched her struggle and fail and try again, who'd finally not forgiven her. Never that, but acknowledged that she'd done the work. Margaret picked up the letter. Read it one more time. Then she did something she hadn't done in 63 years. She prayed, not to any god she was sure of, just to the universe, to whatever force governed second chances and redemption and the long, slow work of becoming better. "Help me do this right," she whispered. "Help me be useful. Help me not waste this chance." The room was silent. No answer came. But somehow, Margaret felt heard. She stood up, walked to her desk, began drafting a response to Isaiah's invitation. Yes, she was in, whatever it took. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Chicago, the same city where her grandfather had built his first hotel, the same city where she'd built her empire, the same city where she'd destroyed it all in 3 minutes of blind prejudice. The city didn't care about her journey. The world kept spinning regardless. But Margaret was different now. Not redeemed, not forgiven, not absolved, just different. And she would spend every day she had left proving that different was possible. That change was real. That the worst version of yourself didn't have to be the final version. She thought about what Isaiah had said. This isn't the ending. This is the beginning. He was right. The work was just starting. Margaret picked up her phone, called Keisha. "I need to schedule more sessions. I joined a new board. There's more to learn." Keisha's voice was warm. "I'll clear my calendar. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me." "I never give up on people who show up." Keisha paused. "You showed up, Margaret. Every session, every hard conversation, every moment when you could have quit." "I almost quit. 100 times. But you didn't." No, she didn't. And that made all the difference. Margaret hung up the phone, looked around her empty house. The awards were gone from the walls, the magazine covers, the photos with important people. All that remained was the letter from Teresa, the note from Isaiah, a few photos of her daughter who was finally starting to call more often. The trappings of her old life were gone. What remained was stripped down, essential, true. Margaret walked to the window, watched the last light fade from the sky. A year ago, she'd been the woman who refused to shake a black man's hand. Today she was the woman who was trying to do better. Tomorrow, she would keep trying. Not because it would erase the past, not because it would earn her forgiveness, but because change was the only thing worth doing. Because every person who saw her journey might believe that their own transformation was possible. Because Dorothy Bennett had taught her son not to carry hate, and her son had taught Margaret not to carry her worst self forever. The sky darkened. The city lights flickered on. Margaret turned away from the window. She had work to do. And for the first time in 63 years, the work actually mattered. Dignity isn't something you earn. Respect isn't something you owe only to the powerful. Change isn't a moment, it's a lifetime of choices. And redemption isn't about being forgiven. It's about becoming someone who never needs to ask for forgiveness again. Margaret Whitmore wasn't there yet, but she was walking, and she would keep walking until there was nothing left but the truth of who she'd become. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because in the end, all any of us can do is try.